So today we're going to be talking about Priscilla, and she was married to a man named Aquila, and they were a pair of Christian missionaries that we find in the Bible after Jesus' ascension, so in the New Testament, and they were friends of Paul, who wrote lots of books in the New Testament. Sorry. So I'm just going to get straight into some scripture, really. So in Acts 2, 3, we read, here he, which is referring to Paul, met a Jew named Aquila, who had been born in the country of Pontus. But Aquila and his wife Priscilla had recently moved to Corinth from Italy, because Claudius commanded that all Jews must leave Rome. Paul went to visit Aquila and Priscilla. Because they were tent makers, just as he was, he stayed with them and worked with them. So we read in these two verses that Aquila and Priscilla have basically been thrown out of their native home, and they've had to leave, presumably relatively last minute, and uproot their lives to a new place that is foreign to them and try and make that their home. This is all just given a bit of background to who they are. And in Acts 18, in verses 18a and 19a, we read, Paul stayed with the believers for many more days. Then he left and sailed for Syria with Priscilla and Aquila. Then they went to Ephesus, where Paul left Priscilla and Aquila. So we read that they sort of travelled with Paul. As we said, after he meets them in verses 2. He stays with them for probably about 18 months and then sails with them to Syria and eventually Ephesus, where he leaves them, and they're friends. But and they work with Paul as missionaries, but they also do work independently from Paul as well, which we read in Acts 18, 24 to 26. A Jew named Apollos came to Ephesus. He was born in the city of Alexandria and was a good speaker who knew the scriptures well. He'd been taught about the way of the Lord and was always very excited when he spoke and taught the truth about Jesus. But the only baptism Apollos knew was the baptism that John taught. Apollos began to speak very boldly in the synagogue, and when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him to their home and helped him better understand the way of God. So we see that God uses them as a pair to kind of lead the leaders of his church. We see Apollos has great faith for God and for Christ, but his knowledge and his beliefs aren't the whole story, and they kind of talk to him about this, and they kind of, I guess, set him right on scripture. And so God uses them to help others, to help expand God's kingdom on earth. And then in 1 Corinthians 16, verse 19, we read, this is Paul writing to the church in Corinth. The churches in the country of Asia send greetings to you. Aquila and Priscilla greet you in the Lord, as does the church that meets in their house. So we see that after Paul left them, they established a church in their home. Most churches in the first century were held in homes. And the suggestion here is that they not only established it together, but they also led it together. And we read that God uses them as a pair to advise, lead and encourage his people. And they kind of follow God through a lot. They were sort of kicked out of their home. And then they sort of travelled as missionaries. And we know from Paul's letters, which are in Corinthians, that the church that they established where they live is in a place that is very morally corrupt, and yet the church still thrives, and that can't be easy. So they go through a lot for God, and this kind of, I guess, shows why Priscilla and Aquila as a pair are significant and sort of important together. But obviously we're talking about women in the Bible, and for this talk specifically Priscilla. So what is it about Priscilla that makes her sort of significant as one of God's people. So as we talked about before, half term, when I first spoke about Virgin Mary, we talked about women in sort of first century seemed to be second-class citizens. They had very limited rights, and sort of were seen to be socially inferior to men. And many women wouldn't work. In fact, it was very uncommon for women to work. The only ones that would do really were those in poorer families where they needed the money. And their roles instead seemed to be caregivers to the parents, and then to their husbands and in-laws and their children. And Priscilla is kind of in stark contrast to this socially acceptable version of a woman. The Bible does not focus on her children or her managing the household, because it's not the thing that is significant about her. It's not what we can learn from her. She is presented as being equal to Priscilla. When Paul meets the couple, we see that she works alongside her husband as a tent maker. And it is referred to, when the couple are referred to in the Bible, they are referred to either equally as Priscilla and Aquila, and Aquila and Priscilla, or actually in some versions, Priscilla and Aquila is the more commonly way around their names, which shows that she is seen to be in equal partnership to her husband. And some theologians do actually believe that she was one of the more important person, like the missionary who kind of led more. But that's just kind of an idea. We don't know that, but we can see that she is equal to her husband. She starts a church with her husband. It's not she accommodates her husband's church in her house. She starts it with him. And as we said, in one of the most morally corrupt areas, and together they make it thrive. It's not her husband doing this, she's working with him, which would be very unique for that time. She's also seen that she is not Aquila's property, but she is a sort of independent woman in her own right. But she's in this loving, equal marriage and partnership. And in the Bible, we read that this seems to be blessed in God's eyes, this sort of equality between her and her husband. The pair, like it says there, they were independent people. And one didn't have a claim on the other, but they worked together as one for God. And we can see that Jesus brought equality for all, and that includes women, particularly in this thing. We see Priscilla being equal to her husband, but this is also very relevant at the moment. Firstly, we're in June, which is Pride Month, and there's equality for all sexualities. That's what Jesus preaches, love and equality for all. And it's also obviously very relevant at the moment with the Black Lives Movement, that race does not define your, I guess, sort of status in the world, that actually we're all equal, and people should embrace the differences and things that make us independent from each other, but ultimately we are all equal, both in the world and in the eyes of God. That's how it should be. And the biblical view on females is very radical. At the time, we see when Paul meets Priscilla working alongside her husband, he's not shown to have any problems or qualms with this. It's said that's sort of accepted. And as Christians, we are called to bring equality for all. Like it's in the Bible. It's not just me saying this. And actually, there are views that can, even in the 21st century, so over 2,000 years later, that can be seen to be radical. That Christian message is radical, but it always has been, and yet it is still thrived. Sorry. And this radical message was preached by Priscilla and by her husband Aquila and Paul and many other Christians throughout history. The fact that it's hard and seems so different from what society says is not a new thing. It's part of what being a Christian is. But it is what it is in God's words, so it's something that we should accept as it's necessary. I'm kind of going to talk about sort of kind of three things that we can learn from Priscilla, and the particular phrasing for these three things are from an article on a website called Crosswalk, but I thought it was really relevant, and I thought they phrased it in a really good way, so I'm going to say that and then I'm going to kind of expand on each point. The first one is God can accomplish great things in difficult circumstances. In the story of in Priscilla's story, we see that she was ejected from Rome. She was continually moving around, but God moves through her and helps her to help Apollos and solidify and refine his theology, and then uses her to establish a church in a place where it would have been very difficult for that church to thrive, and it did thrive. Secondly, God can use the talents of anyone. Priscilla was a relative misfit for her time, but Gashimewe's misfits were the ones that God uses in Scripture. The three women that I've talked about in this series, Priscilla, Mary, and Deborah, all didn't quite fit society's mold of what a woman should be. Deborah was someone who was in power sort of 3,000 years ago in a position of authority. Mary was pregnant, unmarried, but that was blessed in God's eyes that she was carrying his child. And then we see Priscilla being an equal woman who is so different from what a woman was expected to be at the time. Yet the three of them all were used for great things. And there are many other examples of people throughout the Bible that didn't fit society's mold at all, and God still used them for great things. Thirdly, God values hospitality and loyalty. We read that Priscilla is very loyal to her husband, and he is to her, and everything that they have, they share. She is not seen to be his property, as was the case, and he, although she as a woman legally could not hold any property, her husband did, they're seen to what he has, he shares with her, and what she brings into marriage, he shares with him. Then we see that Priscilla hosts a church in her home, and she also, earlier on when Paul meets her, he lives with them for about 18 months. The pair are hospitable to Paul, and he lives in their home with them. So if we want to expand that into general about us, we can say that firstly, no matter what the circumstances are that we encounter, God will help us to bloom wherever he places us. I keep talking about you should trust God's judgment, and that is still up to here. And the reason I keep going on about this is because it is true. God will if you trust in God, he will put you where you need to be, and you will be able to do his will and like his plan for you if you trust in him to put you where you need to be. We see that Priscilla and Aquila trusted in God that they would end up where they needed to be. They lost their home and they traveled around, but eventually they established a home and they built a church there because that is where God wanted them to be. Secondly, in the second point, we can quite often feel that we maybe don't have anything to offer God, or really we don't really fit sort of the stereotypical type of version of normality. But God can still use your talents to bring others to him. Everyone has different talents. You might not be able to necessarily identify what it is that you have and what you bring to the table, but you will have something, and it can be many things. You might be gifted with sort of speaking and leading a church, and that's quite a clear, direct way of helping to bring people to know God. But there are many other talents as well that the majority of people don't have the ability to sort of stand in front of a church of a couple of hundred people and preach to them. And that's fine, because everyone has different talents, because we're all used for different ways. You know, there are, and actually it might be something that you can't necessarily identify, like initially kind of connect to further in God's kingdom. And actually, if you put your faith in him, he can use that and use you to do good. One of the other things I keep mentioning is that God has a plan for you. We're in the Bible that you are created in God's image. That means that you are part of, you are as God planned you. There is no mistake in who you are. And he has a plan to use you as you are for his greater plan. And then thirdly, God can use any circumstance, personality, social or cultural understanding, anything to bring glory to him if we are loyal to him. And that is, in many ways, I think, the hardest thing. In our world, we have so many other things that we can get caught up in, whether that be sort of material wealth, relationships, even things like music, or maybe social media, maybe celebrity that you follow, all sorts of things that we can get caught up in, and we can sort of, God can kind of be pushed to the back, and we're all guilty of it. There's no necessary shame in that, because we all do it. It's not that you are worse than someone else, but we do have to try and stay loyal to God and keep him as our number one focus. And actually, there are things that you maybe need to reassess your life and how you can change things to, keep God as your focus and to stay loyal to you, whether that is that actually you need to take a break from social media, you need to stop listening to that artist's music, you need to unfollow that celebrity, whatever it is that is getting in the way. You have the opportunity to remove that barrier. And that doesn't mean there's not going to be other things that come in that relationship, but it's about staying loyal to who God is. And if you identify things that are taking your loyalty away, removing those things. And it's about trying. It's not necessarily about succeeding, because ultimately we all fall short, but it's about having your heart connecting to God and doing the right thing, I guess. Don't really like the phrasing of that last sentence, but see if I can think of a better way to explain what I mean. Like, yeah, showing your devotion to God, I guess. I kind of, but not listening to and not basically, or what I mean is, don't listen to the distractions that can draw you away from God. And if you need to remove those from your life to stay true to God, then you need to do that. Hopefully that makes a bit more sense. But so, in summary, God will use you no matter who you are or what talents you have, provided that you trust his judgment, his plan, and you stay loyal to him. And that's ultimately what I think we can get from Priscilla being her role in the Bible. as well as what we mentioned earlier, that we are called to bring equality to the world.